Hey Philip, how's it going, buddy? Thanks for sending this track across. Always a pleasure working, or rather listening to your new music and giving some feedback as well. So as always, chucked it into RX Audio. Looking good with your true peak. So you got -1, so I can see you've got a true peak limiter set on that then, and a sample peak as well around the same sort of place. Good integrated loudness, 10.2, nice and even sort of loudness there. Loudness range 3.5. So loudness range, loudness range is kind of like the overall range and differences in loudness throughout the piece. And you probably 3.5 is about probably as low as you want to go for this type of music. I think when you move into like EDM and that sort of music, loudness range can get even lower. But I think 3.5 is a pretty good place to be. Yeah, as I say, I wouldn't go any lower than that. But I appreciate this is the mastered version, so I think we're all good here. So looking at it here, it sounds, or rather it looks good in terms of waveform stats. So let's dive over into, or rather dive in to Reaper and check it out. I'll dive straight in with a quick tip that I think might be of benefit, and this is particularly with mastering in this instance, and it's one thing that I check in particular, is I think it could maybe just be a touch more spread in terms of the stereo field, and there's a free plugin that can help. I mean, you can go back and do this in the mix and move bits and pieces around. Probably something like the synths, and this could also be where maybe you bring up the reverb a touch more on particular instruments. But if you're going to do it in mastering, this is quite useful. And you've got this free plugin from Goodhertz, and it's called the Mid-Side Matrix. And what I do is I enable it, and you got a little goes a long way with this plugin, and it's basically mid-side processing, and you can just boost. I never go above 2 dB like with this in mastering. If I do have to do that, then I'll go back and look at the mix. But basically, you're boosting the sides, that side information. In nature, that will have an impact on the mid signal as well, because even though you are boosting the sides, there are still elements of the mid involved in that. But I'll just play it. So this is without. So this is I've got the sort of the louder section here towards the end. So I'll just play this. This is without the Goodhertz plugin. Okay, and this is with. And I think in doing that and just moving the sides out a bit more, the vocals just sitting a bit better in the middle there, because the instruments you've got here, we'll start from the beginning in a minute. Obviously, we've got vocals, we've got synths, you've got drums, there's bass in there as well. But there's a lot in a particular frequency band, and at times it might sound a little congested. But let's go right back to the beginning. But I thought this is a quick tip, free plugin, something to be aware of, very useful. Generally, what I do is actually, whilst I'm on this, is I will, before it hits the limiter or maximizer, whatever you're using, if you set a 3-second loop like this, and this equates to your short-term LUFS value because it's measured over 3 seconds. Momentary is 3 milliseconds and integrated across the whole piece. And what you're looking for is, so if I solo this now and look at the short-term value. 8.5, and then what you do is you just solo the sides. So I use the BX Meter plugin for this. Any plugin where you can solo the sides would work. So you got solo here for the sides information, and it's nice. 15.6. So deduct 8.6 from 15.6. Blah, 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 blah. What have you got? About 7 in terms of loudness range between that, which is pretty good to be fair. But measure it before it hits the limiter, before it hits the limiter itself. And that's a good range to be in. I usually aim, not that I'm aiming for a target, but I find the sweet spot is between sort of 7 to 9, the difference between the side and the overall mix. But give it a go. Next time you're mixing, just double check that. And I'll also give you an indication of where, okay, maybe it needs to be, maybe it's too centered. But if we turn on the mid-side matrix here, and then you can see it's boosting it by 2 dB in the sides. You can see that looking at the short-term left. So a quick tip there. That's one I find really, really useful. So we'll dive straight in from the beginning. The first thing I've noticed actually is this, and this is good practice to do. I've got this what's called head here, and I always give 3 milliseconds of silence before the track kicks in. So if I move this there, and you can see I would then do that. Basically, what this allows is for, this goes back to the days of CD, but it's also useful for streaming platforms. Case in point, SoundCloud, which I've noticed that if you start a track right at 0, there's milliseconds of noise. And I had this happen on one of my songs, and because I forgot to do this. So just to be aware, I would always, you can see here, it's at 3. Hopefully it's at 3. It was at 3. Now it's moved. I don't want that, so let's put that back. 3 milliseconds of just silence at the beginning. And if I play it, it's not much, but it does make a difference. So just another quick tip for when you're mastering. Just put that little bit of silence in the beginning there. Just stopping it there. I think it sounds really nice what you got so far. I can hear the kick really well. You got that nice synth coming through as well. Maybe one thing I might be inclined to do is just, well, you got that tom roll. Let's maybe spread that tom roll out a bit more. So let's play it from here again. Yeah, it's kind of moving slightly to the right and then back to the center again. But creative choices again. This is an opportunity just to move it in that stereo field a bit more. The synths. Let's have a play again. The synth. What I might be inclined to do there is, because you've got that, there's like a synth bass. I'll play it again. It's a nice synth bass. I don't think they are jostling for position too much, but it's one of those ones in the low mids that you got here. So you got between sort of 250 hertz to 2000 hertz, and just maybe depends what you want to take precedence. I think your bass sounds really nice, so I would probably leave it how it is, but maybe carve out some space, because I think you want the thing with synths are you want that sort of low mid energy and frequency in there, so it doesn't sound brittle and thin. I think that's what you've got going on here, but you could carve out a little bit of space maybe for those synths in the low mids of the bass, or maybe sidechain it, or things like, off the top of my head, you've got iZotope, neutron, or unmask, and you can be really subtle with that. And what it would do is it will trigger off a key and just dynamically duck certain frequencies that are jostling for position. But there are other plugins out there that do that as well, but that's one example. I use that a lot, really, really useful. But again, I find that a little goes a long way. You need to be careful with those plugins, because I did this before where I put it on a snare and I keyed it to the vocal, because they were sort of like where the snap of the snare was, the vocal was there as well. And the snare just kept on, I kept losing it. And then I realized it's because it was keyed to this vocal and it was wildly ducking it. So one to be aware of. Got a hi-hat. Maybe you could move the hi-hat slightly to, depending on the perspective of the drums. I do it from the drummer's perspective, if I remember rightly. I think it's the drummer's perspective. Or it might be the audience perspective. Either way, my hat's usually panned to the right. I can't remember which way around it is. It's the audience perspective. I went and double checked. It's the audience perspective. That's where I do it from. I'm not a drummer, so I do it from the audience perspective. I know a lot of drummers do it the other way, but there's no right or wrong way. I'd be inclined, I think the snare The snare could do with a bit more body in the low frequencies, a bit more representation there, I think. Maybe making space for it with the bass in the bass regions. It's if you listen to the snare, just want a bit more power from the snare, I think. And the kick drum, I think the kick sounds good, but again, maybe just a touch more. You can hear there's a lot of bass there. So what you could potentially do here is your bass is providing the sub bass and obviously bass as well on the lows. Maybe just carve out a bit of space for the kick drum in the bass. You could even think of rolling off some of the low shelving some of the bass frequencies, sub bass frequencies of the kick, and then boosting it around the fundamental frequency of the kick, and just bringing that kick out a bit more. Also, what would help the kick come through a touch more as well is you find the snap in the kick in the sort of the mid range, usually around the high mids. You can bring a bit of snap out in the kick as well. Potential thought. Now the vocal, because I know in the notes you said that you want to pay particular attention to the vocal. The vocal is sitting there, but it seems to be sitting a bit on top of the mix. Not massively, but it's kind of like if you had layers, you kind of want it all to be on one layer, and it kind of just sounds like it's sitting a touch on top. And that could well be due to, I think there's just a bit of congestion in there. So let's just play it. So you can certainly hear in the low mids between 250 to 2000 hertz. You've got a lot going on there. You've got, if I play it again, you've got snare. I mean, there's no. This is going to happen, isn't it? You've got snare, vocal, synth, bass, and you kind of need to carve out space for that vocal to sit there. So that's moving synth further out, maybe. That's creating space using some EQ for that vocal to sit in that pocket around here. So just sweep around 4 or 5 dB until that vocal jumps out. And do the same in the high mids as well. And let's play the high mids. So you can hear there, it's competing with the snare. So that's where you could use something like Unmask in iZotope. Others exist. And just key the snare to the vocal really subtly, because again, you don't want to take away the snap of the snare, just so that vocal comes through. Let's play it on. Watch the world crumble around us. Only reach for the things my hands can't touch, but it's still too much. So I reach for you, a pinprick, a line. Because you haven't got a massive amount going on, which is great. That's the way I love it. Like, you've got your synths, your bass, your vocal, and your kit. But I think it's just moving things around. Think about your reverbs as well. Let's just play it again. Around us, only reach for the things my hands can touch, but it's still too much. Check that. How many reverbs you've got going on here. Check your time-based processing, because oftentimes less is more with that. I think as well, you've got, with that reverb for the vocal, yeah, you've got a bit of a tail on the high frequencies of the vocal, which is great, because what that does is, with the reverb, if you've accentuated the high frequencies of a reverb, it's going to stand out more. But if you do the opposite, it then pushes it down. So what you could potentially do here, maybe experiment with the reverb on the vocal, and either roll off or high shelf some of the higher frequencies and see if that helps the vocal to just sit down a bit more so it's not so present. That's one that you can consider, because you can hear that tail from the high frequencies of the reverb. Because you can hear it's like psst once the vocal stops. Around us, only reach for the things my hands can touch, but it's still too much for you. Yeah, the snare's getting lost a bit. Again, it's because you've got that competition going on there. So I'm thinking this is where maybe you could use, going back to what I said earlier about the low mids with the snare, and then boosting those just to bring up the snare, maybe rather in the low mids rather than in the sort of high mid frequencies. So what EQs have I got here? Bom 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 bom. Infinite EQ. Let's use that. Might take a bit of time to load. I've just upgraded it.
Around us, only reach for the things my hands can touch, but it's still too.
Bear with me. They've changed the layout, so I'm trying to work out. Here we go. There we are. Yeah, when they change the layout of these things. Thing is, you see a lot of tutorials that say, "Oh, boost the frequencies to find the ones that are sort of like resonating." But obviously, if you boost it by this much anyway, it's going to resonate, isn't it? So generally, I wouldn't do it any more than sort of boosting it by sort of 4 or 5 dB, because then I think you're just creating not artificial resonance, but it's going to happen anyway, isn't it, when you're boosting things that much? So let's have a listen.
Around us, only reach for the things my hands can touch, but it's still too much. I reach for you, a pinprick of light, getting brighter in the darkness. Only reach for the things.
So that's at 140 hertz. And there you've got quite a lot of you can hear the resonance happening there. So you might want to go in and just check those particular. So what have we got going on here? I think it's happening in the vocal. Just look at 140 hertz with the vocal, maybe a bit of dynamic EQ there or something, just to contain that. But I'm listening now for the snare, really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here. 150 hertz. I think you might want to play around with the snare around there and the vocal. Maybe duck out the vocal a bit there. I mentioned dynamic EQ, but you could make space for the body of the snare to come in around there, possibly. It's one thing to experiment with. You can hear the body of the snare there. Boom, boom. And maybe duck that out of the bass as well. It's an idea. But definitely play around with that particular region. As you can hear, there's a few resonances going on there. I mean, that's only 5 dB of boost. You can hear those resonances. So around 150 hertz, snare and vocal. Go and have a look at those. If I were you, I think with this, I think this has highlighted that a bit more. When it comes to EQ and instruments, I think of it like a jigsaw. And what you're doing is you're moving and carving out space, and you're creating pockets for things to sit in. But obviously what you don't want to do is make these wild sweeping changes, just a subtle EQ here and there, and it will make a massive difference. So that's sort of your low mid frequencies. So where do we get to about here? So let's play it on a bit. I'm just going to disable that.
To everything I know, change is the only thing that stays the same.
See here, I really like that. I really like what you've done there. So it's sort of the pitch shifter effect on the vocal, but maybe a touch more reverb. But you could use reverb, going back to what I said earlier about rolling off the higher frequencies of the reverb, so it pushes it further back in the mix. The opposite would be to roll off the lower frequencies and boost the highs of the reverb, which would make it more present. But if you do the opposite, it then pushes it further back. But you'd still get this nice wide soundscape.
To everything I know, change is the only thing that stays the same. In 100 years, no one will even know her name.
So here, you've got this really cool, almost like a submarine, isn't it? I love those sound effects. And you've got this vocal as well in the background, this haunting sort of female vocal. Maybe think of pan position of those, and also think of frequency balance of those as well. So where the sort of submarine effect might be the presence frequency of that, duck it out of the ambient vocal of the woman's vocal on the right, and then boost the opposites, if that makes sense, and that will just add some further stereo width to this particular bit here. So where one presence frequency is of one instrument, duck it out of the other, and then vice versa, and then further pan them, and that can help accentuate that. And also that then vocal in the middle there would sound, it's already coming through, but just an idea.
Say you won't forget. Father,
there, some delay, ding 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 on that. I keep calling it a submarine effect because I can't think of what else to call it, but maybe some delay on that. I like the synth harp. That's really cool. The synth harp. I'm finding again though, you got this vocal. It just sounds like it might be sitting on top a touch. Again, I think it's with this one here. It might be because I'm going to sweep around a minute. There might be too much in terms of high mid. Let's go back. Set a loop region, that might help. 2.93 kilohertz. That seems to be where it's poking out a bit. So what you could do here is you could dip that out of the other instruments that are in that particular frequency range. So let's have a listen and see what they are. Tonal balance is really good for this because you can just do that. So you've got snare, there's a bit of hat in there, and you've got the synths as well. So to make that sit a bit better, you could, out of those instruments I just mentioned, you could duck out a couple dB around 2.93 kilohertz, and then you could duck that a touch on that vocal as well, and that might help it to sit a bit better. You could do this with the other vocal as well, the main male vocal. I hope you heard that. As soon as I got it to 3.9, it immediately jumped out of the speakers. Again, it's only a 3 dB boost. But by highlighting it like this, it helps to really push it to find that presence frequency quicker, I find, when you're able to do that. And it's starting from the wrong place. That frequency there. So again, this could be where, I don't know, you could automate EQ for that when the male. So this is where, yeah, you could automate EQ to come in when the male vocalist comes in, and just have that bypassed when the vocalist isn't singing. Alternatively, again, this is where you could just notch out to 3 dB on it's on the drums really, isn't it? And on the synths as well. And just help with that there. Also, knock it out with the reverb as well. You probably don't need that in the reverb, I would say. But don't go too wild with it, though. Like 2 dB, something like that. With a Q of about 2.5 to 3. It's quiet now, but I still hear 1,000 voices in the silence. So even doing that there, I could, as soon as I ducked it by about 2 dB, it just sort of, it dropped. No, it didn't drop, but it just sat a bit better. Now, it has been a long day in the studio, so that could well be my ears. It's quiet now, but I still hear 1,000 voices in the silence. Lights down. I'm wondering if it needs a bit more bass bass boost. Let's stick another one of these in. I'm just going to sweep around, make it narrow again.
It's quiet now, but I still hear 1,000 voices in the silence. Lights down, that momentary beeping sound.
Now with mastering, inherently, if you make a cut somewhere, it generally does boost in the other opposite directions. That's 140, 386. That's my maths now. 670, 1002, and then we're going up to 4000. It's about right, actually. So making a cut there. So in theory, what I'm saying here is if you make a boost in one place, you could then double it and double it and double it and double it, and then it's going to have an effect later on. Basically, it's like yin and yang, essentially. So alternatively, what you could do is you could just duck out some of the high frequencies. You could put like a high shelf in, and then that would then do that, or you could go like that. Is what I'm getting at. But I'm wondering if you could just have a bit more low bass. But too, let's
It's quiet now, but I still hear 1,000 voices in the silence. Lights down, that momentary beeping sound. As we wait to dissipate. Good night.
Yeah, it's about 80, isn't it? But again, with mastering, I don't do anything. 2 dB is usually the max, and make it quite wide. If you're cutting, narrow, boosting, wide. Not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good way to start.
It's quiet now, but I still hear 1,000 voices in the silence. Lights down,
As you can tell, I'm still getting used.
that momentary beeping sound. As we wait to dissipate. Good night. For me in the mix like
I think what might help here, listening to it now, is by boosting the low frequencies, just a couple dB or two. That vocal, it's starting to kind of go like that, and that vocal's sitting a bit better. So you could experiment with that as well.
It's quiet now, but how did it come to this? We were so close to bliss. How did it come to this?
Yeah, I mean, that's in master. You can go back and fix this in the mix rather than do it in the master, because obviously with mastering, when I'm boosting this frequency around here, it's boosting it in all instruments rather than just the bass. So if you've got time, go back to the original mix and boost it in the bass rather than in the mastering. But that's probably what I would do here, is because you can hear it just evens it out a bit more. And it kind of, it's just bringing it back on an even keel. But really subtle stuff, mate. I think it's another great tune. I hope that helps. I hope there's some useful tips and tricks to take out of this. Any questions, as always, just fire them over. Happy to go through anything again if it didn't make sense. And keep me posted on the release. Share it with me, and I'll share it on socials. I'll share it in the podcast newsletter as well, and obviously put it in the podcast Spotify playlist. And good luck with the release, mate. Keep me updated, and I'll catch up with you soon.